Do you own a seven-figure practice? You've probably heard me talk a lot about the Seven Figure Practice Club recently. This is a new, amazing program where we are getting together seven-figure practice owners together in a small group of 12 to work together for a year. There's so many things that seven-figure practice owners deal with that they don't have a community to ask questions, learn, and grow from. If you want to apply to be in the Seven Figure Practice Club, head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/club. There, you're going to be able to read all about what the program entails. We're going to be covering all sorts of things in our monthly meetings. We're meeting twice a month. The first meeting is 90 minutes, and we're going to have three 25-minute hot seats for you to dig in and to get questions answered, and also to help other seven-figure practice owners. The second meeting of the month is going to be one of our practice owners presenting on something they are knocking out of the park. And it's a chance to really be able to learn, teach, grow from each other in a way that you really don't find anywhere else in the marketplace. Also, in-person meetings are so important. And that's why twice a year, we're going to connect, once here in Traverse City, Michigan, and then another time somewhere else, yet to be determined. And we're going to connect, we're going to hang out, we're going to talk private practice, but we're also going to have a lot of fun. So if you want to apply for the Seven Figure Practice Club, head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/club and fill out your application today. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 948. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. Wow, through December and January, we've been doing two different series. In December, we did the Seven Figure Practice series where we interviewed a ton of seven-figure practice owners, and we're actually going to be doing a couple more of those before the end of the month. Today, we're actually going to be talking about running your practice like a business, and I'll tell you more about Rick in just a second. But just a reminder, until the end of the month, our applications are still open for the Seven Figure Practice Club. We've had an amazing amount of applications come in. We're taking 12 people that are seven-figure practice owners, and we're going to be doing a year-long mastermind together. We're going to be meeting once a month for 90 minutes, where we're going to have three 25-minute hot seats where you come and you bring your questions, you bring your focus, and then the rest of the group for 25 minutes focuses on you, gives you great solid ideas, content, way that they would think through it. And then the second time that we meet, one of our individuals, one of our practice owners will be doing an hour-long presentation on something that they're just knocking out of the park, sharing those things that we've learned with one another to make sure that we're just saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing work. And then also you're getting a lot of feedback from these other seven-figure practice owners on areas maybe you could be doing consulting. Maybe you could do a spin-off business. If you're really into something, maybe there's something that could be another business venture that you jump into. And then twice a year, we are going to meet up once here in Traverse City, Michigan, hanging out by the Great Lakes, and then we're going to figure out where our second spot is. So if you want to apply for that, you can head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/club. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/club. Again, those applications are closing next week, so make sure you get that application in soon. Well, I am really excited to have Rick Watson with me. Rick is not a practice owner, but what he's talking about today is all about scaling. He's the author of A Firm Worth Building, which helps professional businesses scale and thrive. He's also the CEO of the National Referral Network and several other businesses, and lives with his family on a 5-acre horse farm and winemaking operation in California, where he still finds time to enjoy the life that he's been able to build. Rick, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I love that you find time for those things outside of business. That's exactly what we talk about here all the time. Of we're not just building a business to hustle more. We want to build a business that impacts the world, but that also we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor.
Yeah, I think if you do it right, I think there's a misconception that if you build a business to a certain point, it overtakes you, and I don't think that's the way it is. I think if you build it right, you create more and more freedom. It's the conduit to your dreams, not the restriction to your dreams.
Yeah. Now, did you always think that way, or was that something you had to learn the hard way?
That's a funny thought. I'm sure I was just like everybody else that I was just going to work my tail off and get to the point. But I know that, for example, my dad had always showed up. He was an inspiration to me, and he always showed up to my baseball games, football games. He was the only parent at away games, and I thought I really would love to build a business that's like that.
Mm. Yeah, so you had a good example from the beginning.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, you help people scale their businesses, exit their businesses. As we dive into this series, it's mostly people that either already have seven-figure practices or they want to have a seven-figure practice. So we've got people that may just be at the very beginning of that journey. Maybe they have a solo practice, or they're adding a couple clinicians, all the way up to people we've interviewed that have 50 plus clinicians. When you think about businesses that are scaling, let's start with maybe the things people often do wrong. And especially when they're below seven figures. What do people do wrong when they maybe first hit that 100K all the way through $1 million in revenue?
Yeah. So the biggest thing they tend to do wrong is they don't build the foundations right in the first place. So they build to a certain point, the entity falls of its own weight, and they start over again. And that happens over and over and over again. It's what we call a J curve. They grow to the maximum inefficiency and then fall backwards, start over again. And so, as much as you can get rid of those J curves, those restriction points, by having a mentor or some way to see down the road a little further, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I can think of.
Mm. Yeah, talk a little bit more about that J curve and that kind of going back to the start. What does that look like practically?
Well, the J curve, again, it's when you hit that point of maximum inefficiency. So let's say, for example, you didn't hire a staff person, and so you're booking all your own appointments. And I mean, I get that for the 7-digit club, that doesn't really fit. But what I'm trying to point out is that it's at varying levels of the company when you hit up against a restriction point. So when you hire that first person and then you have to train them, okay, well, that slows you down. Now you have less ability to do your job, right? Then you hire that second person. They say the skills required to hire one person is a different set of skills than no one. But then having two, three, four people, that's a different set of skills because now you've got balancing act and specialties. And then having a staff of, say, 20, that's a completely different set of skills that you have to balance. So at each one of those points, those are restriction points, and that creates the J curve.
Mm. Now, as people start to want to grow, one thing you and I were talking about before we got rolling here was the idea of trust compression. I would love for you to dissect that, and maybe we can talk through how that applies to a private practice.
Yeah, so trust compression to me is kind of an interesting concept, and it's something I think that we just bounced into. So my world comes a lot in sales where you're kind of discussing, and I think sales is everywhere. It's anytime you're trying to convince somebody of an idea. But to do that, you have to build trust. In my world, the common thing that happens is somebody talks for an hour, hour and a half, and then they take a break, and then they do that again. It's called like an opening appointment and then a closing appointment. Um, in What we found is that if you break that up, it's not the number, I'm sorry, it's not the length of those interactions that build trust. It's the number of interactions, and it's just how we're all wired. So what we've done is broken our process into our appointment process or whatever we're doing into short little steps. So instead of two appointments, we have four appointments. Okay. So 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then we break them really frequently. So maybe two or three times a week. What that does is you'll have the interactions, the number of interactions that in a traditional sense you might have had in a year or 6 or 3 months. And so the relationship ages faster, and the trust is built faster.
Mm. Now, I think, for a lot of therapists, they're kind of in the mindset of doing therapy for 45 to 60 minutes. For me, when I hear this, I'm really thinking about so many different areas other than even just that individual session of building trust with people you're networking with that might be referral sources, or connecting with the media, or even just the onboarding process of having an intake, but then also making sure that before that intake, between that intake call and when the person actually comes in for therapy, having multiple touch points. Now, would that be an appropriate application of the trust compression, like that kind of model, or I want to make sure I'm getting it right?
No, I think you really hit it well in in the therapy practice. I think, for example, onboarding. You could do it where you just send somebody a questionnaire and then they send it back, right? But that's not building relationship. So if you can break that questionnaire into sections and you do it where you have somebody who talks to them, I think that today we're going to talk a little bit about the past. Or I'm not sure exactly how you guys break that up, but my point is that if you can find a way to break pieces of your discussions into multiple interactions, ideally with multiple people, then you're building a trust with the firm. And I think that's the idea, the seed that you want to consider.
Mm. Now, as people do this, how do they systematize it? Because having multiple conversations, that's a lot of staff time sometimes. Are there things that you recommend in regards to automations or different ways that you onboard that builds that trust, while also not having it take up a ton of staff time?
Yeah. So it's funny, we'd use videos quite a bit. So there will be, so, and I don't think it uses a lot of staff time. If you were using an hour to take in a piece of information, all we're suggesting is break that into maybe thirds, and they spend less time because they don't have to get started each time. So I'm thinking of an intake, for example. If you could break that into multiple appointments, for us, our intake is 4 appointments. It's 4 15-minute appointments. Um, I mean, I don't think it's that different. And systematizing it, we have step one, step two, step three, step four. So what's neat about that, and again, maybe different in your situation, but what's neat about that is now you have a language to talk about. So it says, here's our onboarding process, and you're at step two, and this is what you should get out of step three, and so on. And we can do within the firm, we can talk to each other. Where are they at? Oh, they're at step two. So rather than making it one thing, consider making it multiple steps and then define those steps, because that makes the firm work more efficiently. And I can say, well, I can't do step two with you today, but I'm going to have Judy do step two with you. And they're like, great, because they know they're getting step two.
Going in network with insurance can be tough. I know when I took insurance, there were long wait times and it was so confusing. Filing all the right paperwork is time consuming and tedious. And even after you're done, it can take months to get credentialed and start seeing clients. That's why Alma makes it easy and financially rewarding to accept insurance. When you join their insurance program, you can get credentialed within 45 days and access enhanced reimbursement rates with major payers. They also handle all of the paperwork from eligibility checks to claims submissions and guarantee payment within 2 weeks of each appointment. Once you've joined Alma's insurance program, you can see clients in your state of licensure, regardless of where you're working from. It's amazing to know that you can be fully online. Learn more about building a thriving practice with Alma at helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to get started. Now, I know that one thing that you teach is really making sure that what you call edification, and really making sure that you're lifting up your staff and kind of giving whether you call it a blessing or you're affirming them. Can you talk a little bit about that when you're thinking about growing beyond yourself as the only leader within the practice? What does that look like to start to lift up other people in the practice?
Yeah. So edification is one of the most important things to do if you're trying to scale beyond yourself. You ha- Nobody wants a worse person to speak with, right? Oh, I'm this professional. I'm the person who's the smartest, and here's so and so, they're not as bright as me. That's what happens more often than not. That's de-edification, and we do it in stupid ways by undercutting somebody. If they don't call you back right away, just keep trying because they'll get to you. Well, that's de-edification. So edification is the opposite, right? We're going to build people up. We're going to say, now, Mary is salt of the earth. God, I just think she's awesome. And I'm so happy to have her with us. She does the best job of getting the details from you, or billing or whatever. So if you build those people up, what happens is, or even another professional, right? You bring in another therapist and you say, look, I'm really good at what I do, but there's nobody better than Joe when it comes to this issue. Well, what that does is you've elevated that person, you've given them some momentum, and the person's going to be like, great, and allows you to delegate. And that's the reason you edify, is the ability to delegate well.
Mm. Now, for the business leaders that you work with, when people start to delegate well, what shifts for them?
Well, they can be in more than one place at one time. I mean, that's really what it is. You're duplicating either portions of yourself, or, I mean, I just think we get a lot more done because people trust people other than me. I'll say what's so neat about it is, in our situation, 90%, 95% of I have clients, of my client interactions are not with me. They're with my firm. So for a firm to grow, you need for that to happen. You can't be the rate limiting step. And at some point it should be 99%. And so on. If 70% of the interactions you have with your clients are you, then you can't scale. You have to find a way to do that, and edification is part of that. That's delegating. That's part of that as well.
Mm. Now, as people start to grow, I definitely feel that being in multiple places at once, especially, when I work with consulting clients, we look at, how much are you making per hour and how much could you pay to do the task that you're doing? Oftentimes, this thing that takes them an hour to do, they could be paying 30, $40 an hour. And if they just did one or two more counseling sessions, they could pay for 10 or 15 hours of time. So that it becomes quite a multiplier when people start to add assistants and extra people to help. Um, where do we go from there? Because we're talking about really viewing your practice as a business. What are maybe some of the core elements that we need to have a handle on as we shift from just maybe having our practice, I don't know, kind of just emerge where we're reactionary to it versus being proactive and saying, this year, I want to really clean up the business. I want to even maybe make it so automated that someday in the future I can sell it. Like, what are some of those core elements that people really need to get a handle on?
That's a really big question. We have a whole book on that. I would say I would say this, that first of all, you gave a great example. The beginnings of scaling is to hire that lower person, right? The person who's cheaper than you, and so you're making $300 an hour and they're making $30 an hour. You want to buy a lot of that time. I think the second level of that is starting to buy people who are maybe even more expensive than you. Okay, because you're not the top of the food chain. So you might, I mean, coming to terms with that, there's somebody who's better at some aspect of something that you do, or are expected to do. So for example, maybe you hire an operations manager and that person's expensive. So I think having that high end person is also another level, just because it doesn't always have to be lower. I think beyond that, what is super important is defining the experience, the client experience that you want to repeat, and then systematizing that client experience. So if I'm one therapist and I want to have 10 therapists, I mean, they're all going to do things slightly different. But what I'm going to do is try to create little guardrails so that we have a specific experience that we want our people to go down. And maybe that's step oriented, where you break it into pieces so that we follow 6 pillars. I don't, however you want to phrase it. But the idea is systematizing your practice so that your great experience that you deliver presently, you can deliver at mass. It happens with accountants, where they're a great accountant, but they can't become but they can't scale their practice to other accountants because they're all doing things different. So what you need to do is to start to define what that experience is supposed to look like. And once you do, you can scale it.
Mm. Now, when people start to get those things in order, where do you see so I think there's very normal things that happen when people are under 100K. So they're wearing multiple hats, they don't value their own time, and then they start to add some assistants in, they start to add clinicians that are at different price points or maybe serve different populations. When people really start to scale, what are the new challenges that you see that maybe folks hit when they're at say half a million to $1 million?
So you did two things there. I think that scaling that one person into multiple, that's when you start running it like a business, okay? As opposed to running it like, a fiefdom. So even if you had a couple of clinicians and a couple of employees, a big problem that exists there is that they kind of run the practice as an afterthought, and they are running it like a fiefdom. It's I told you to do this, and this is why. You're not motivating people. You're not empowering people. Right. So then you grow to a certain point. And now you've got a larger practice, and you're at a half a million and seven. Now you're getting bigger. Now that the importance of motivating and creating a culture to your company that everybody holds each other responsible for a certain feel or a fit and finish of what you're supposed to be delivering. And even the boss gets held to account by the lowest person if you violate that experience that we're trying to create. When you do that, when you can build that culture, um, that's success at the end of the day.
Mm. Now, when you're helping people exit, one question that I often get is around valuation of companies, and this may not be completely your expertise, but I would just love your thoughts on. Imagine someone in the next 3 to 5 years is thinking, "I would love to exit this. I would love to, just sell this company." What are some things that they should keep in mind as they're moving towards it, and then also that valuation process? What typically goes into that?
So, for one, I think you look at a business broker or something like that. The first thing they'll always tell you is that you got to start in advance. So, 3 to 5 years in advance really helps them. And the reason is because they're going to go back through your books and they're going to clean up your stuff. So much of running the business, particularly when you're running it a little bit like a fiefdom, is that you tend to abuse the business for your own purposes. Well, that's great. But when you go to sell the business, somebody is going to look at that. They're going to be looking at the numbers. So you might be you're helping your tax situation, but you're hurting your valuation because you didn't um, have the company actually running on its own. And then one thing I like to think about in business when you sell a business is there's a strategic acquisition, and that's going to tend to deliver um, a higher multiple. And then there's just a cash acquisition, which is they're just looking at how much cash you're producing, and it's an interest rate. So they go, well, I'm taking 10% risk. That means that the practice should be worth, I don't know, theoretically 10 times what the cash flow coming in is. Well, so you need to know those numbers, which is so important. That means you might have to have a part-time CFO to make sure your numbers are solid, 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 right? And then you start working off those multiples. Strategic acquisition is when you start trying to find somebody who really wants what you do uniquely, which is why having a great client experience is so important. But they want your locations, they want your steps, they want whatever it is that you have, and they're willing to pay higher than the going multiple to get that. So understanding what kind of acquisition you would have, and then building it so that that acquisition is really easy for someone to sit there and do the math. Those are some ideas on acquisitions.
Mm, that's awesome. Rick, the last question I always ask is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Mm. So I think that if you want to have a purpose driven life, a purpose driven practice. And for us, I know that we've always used this idea that we build what should exist. So step back in your own world, in your practice, and think, or in the industry, and think about what you don't like about it, what should be better. and invent that. Okay. Because that has value, that has purpose and staying power. So those are some thoughts.
Mm. So awesome. If people want to grab your book, if they want to connect with you, where should we send them?
Yeah, the easiest way to find my book is you go to Amazon and just type in Rick Watson. That should pull it up, or A Firm Worth Building. That's we'd always appreciate reviews. That's helpful. You can also go to the National Referral Network. I just think it's interesting. Sometimes in your world, you'll need a business broker, or you need an accountant, or an attorney, and that's one of our businesses that we have. And when you go there, nrnamerica.com, it will pull up the book automatically. But you'll see a bunch of other things, and there's a little find a pro, and you'll see a bunch of other pros there that you might need to help scale your practice.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Great. Thank you.
Well, as you think about your goals this year, where you are headed, we can help you in a lot of different ways. We have our membership communities. Just a reminder that on March 11th, we are kicking off Level Up Week. That's where we're going to be doing a ton of webinars and panels all around every single phase of practice and how you can grow. So that's going to be coming up. There will be more details over at practiceofthepractice.com/level up. Also, if you're interested in joining our membership communities, reach out to us. We can let you know more about that. And at the end of the month, that's when all of the applications close for the 7-Figure Practice Club. So if you are a 7-figure practice owner, get that application in before the end of the month. That's over at practiceofthepractice.com/club. So a lot going on. And we could not do this show without our amazing sponsors. Today, our sponsor is Alma. And Alma and I know that building a private practice can be super challenging. Growing your caseload, navigating insurance, managing billing, all of that is just really frustrating to deal with at times. If you want to build a thriving practice, you should join Alma. Their insurance program helps you get higher reimbursement rates and gets you credentialed and your staff within 45 days. You can learn more over at helloalma.com/Joe. Again, that's helloalma.com/Joe to get started. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.